Tit for Tat is a program with passionate people discussing the things they love. Adult language and themes will be used. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Tit for Tat. My name is William Brown. With me, as always, is Jay Bowman.
Hi, everybody. No, I don't have a line this week. I'm lazy.
And with us this week is Jay Hash, nerd from Oregon, friend of ours.
Hey there.
Director of stage, and what is your current project on the stage?
Right now, I'm getting ready to go and direct a stage play called Anne of the Thousand Days, and it's actually going to be really cool because normally it's pumpkin pants and leotards and ye this and all that, and it's actually going to be quite nice because I'm doing it in the vein of a wonderful movie that just came out last week, Mad Max. It's going to be a post-apocalyptic type of stylization of it, so I'm really excited about it.
I'm sure your actors are just thrilled with that interpretation.
Oh, actually, I had people lining up out the door. Some people were kind of sick and tired of the way in which that we do what the theater community affectionately calls chestnuts. And, any type of different take we could do on a,
something like Hamlet would be a wonderful thing.
Exactly, yeah. And, you see it a lot with things like Shakespeare and stuff like that. And seeing as how this is kind of the alternate version of Shakespeare's Henry VIII, but it's from Anne Boleyn's perspective. It seemed like it was ripe for doing something a little new and unique.
That actually sounds kind of interesting.
Well, hopefully it will be.
And your theater is in Eugene, Oregon, correct?
Yeah.
So,
it's the Very Little Theater, and it's actually, interestingly enough, little side note tidbit of trivia, it is the oldest theater west of the Mississippi, the oldest community theater west of the Mississippi.
Well, that is something to be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
Our local community theater that I used to be a part of decided that it just was too expensive and became a church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that type of stuff tends to happen. Luckily, we've had a really good membership for the past 87 years, and we're in the black as far as we're concerned.
Woohoo! That's always a wonderful thing. So
we have the confusion that is, we have an Apollo here.
Ooh.
It's really pretty much just for our community theater, but, it is Apollo of Martinsburg, so...
Gotcha. So does it come with the hook and everything? And they pull you off stage if you insult the Toastmaster or something like that?
Sadly, no, but I think they want to get that for every Halloween. We do Rocky Horror.
Okay.
Shadowcast. And I believe that's actually a prop they want next year.
Get the hook,
The hook and the dancer. Good times. So, this week's subject, not as much fun as we're having with theater, because we could go on about that, but that's another episode.
Yeah.
This week's episode, Space, the Final Frontier.
Good old Star Trek.
Jade, that was your cue.
Oh, shit. I was also prepping our end theme.
Space, the final frontier. These are the
voyages of Starship Enterprise.
Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
The call of the nerdling, of many nerds. You hear that come on when you were growing up, and you came a-running.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're the guest, Jay, your first episode of Star Trek.
Oh, my first episode of Star Trek. I don't even remember. It's been so long. I know that I started with original series episodes back like when I was really, really young. And the main thing that I remember was not any one specific episode, but it was the way in which the episodes were shown. And I always thought it was unique because I didn't watch a lot of old TV when I was a kid. I was watching He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I was watching, whatever passed for children's entertainment those days. But when my dad turned on Star Trek and we would sit and we would watch it, and I, heartily enjoyed it for any number of reasons why, I would always remember that whenever they would go and cut to a commercial, it would always do that fade to black. But the way in which that they were filming the episodes, it would take it out by color hue. And so the last color that would always disappear would be the reds. So every time that it would go to fade to black for a commercial, it would fade all the way through the color spectrum until almost everything went red, and then it cut to black. And so that's the first memory that I honestly actually have of Star Trek, which is a really interesting note. But beyond that, I got initially into Star Wars first, and my dad says it was him. I kind of claim that it was a friend of mine from preschool who had gotten me into it. But he was also into Star Trek too, and so he kind of, gave me impetus to go and do stuff like that and get interested in that. And so pretty much, let's see, I was born in 1983, so I would have been probably about 4 or 5 years old when TNG first came on the air. And I think I was starting to really watch it and get cognizant of it probably about age 10, so maybe a little bit younger than that, around 94 or so, maybe so 9 or 10. And or 91 or so. I don't know. I can't do math. This is one of the things. This is why I'm a theatrical artist, is that I don't do mathematics and science.
Oh yeah,
but
except you're 1, 2, 3, 4.
Exactly.
2, 3, 4. Yeah.
But I used to watch brand new TNG episodes when they would come on. At 7:00 on Thursday nights. And I think I pretty much started really getting interested around season 4, season 5, because one thing that I do remember is I always found the leotards, the spandex one pieces that they had to wear really weird, like it was something foreign to me. And so I'm guessing I probably came in right around season 3 or season 4 of TNG when they did the uniform switchover to the Mandarin collars that were made out of wool. And so, pretty much from there, it was just kind of, I just consumed and consumed and consumed. And there was a hiatus there for a little while when Deep Space Nine was rounding out its 7th season, and Voyager was starting to get into the middle of its 4th or 5th, where I just kind of, I got other things that I need to focus on. And so I really didn't
Something
pick
other
back
than Star
up.
Trek?
Yeah, I know.
You heathen!
Yeah, well, I was starting to get into high school, and there was, all the wonderful things such as awkwardness and, band and speech and debate and all those other things. I do remember, making sure that I tuned in for the season finales of both of those series, but I don't recall really catching much of the middle. I know on Deep Space Nine that, I was president of the Star Trek Club at my high school, so we did watch some VHS taped copies of that. But Voyager really didn't hold very much interest for me, and I thought that after George Lucas had released the prequels, that when they decided to do Enterprise, it was absolute blasphemy, and didn't actually watch the entirety of Enterprise until after I was.
You didn't miss anything. That goddamn thing was awful.
Yeah, well, okay. It has some pluses. It has plenty of minuses. The first season two were kind of, on the downward slope, and they weren't doing themselves any favors with the whole time travel stuff that they were trying to pull. But it kept on going through, various showrunners, and eventually when they got to Manny Cotto, and right around its ending is when it actually did start getting really good. But
that was
a
case of too little, too late, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, and the main thing is too is that I was also a big consumer of the books in college. So whereas I wasn't watching Voyager or Enterprise, I was still picking up copies of SCE. I was picking up copies of Deep Space Nine's 8th season, quote unquote. I was picking up some stuff from Voyager and whatnot, but I eventually started wanting to read the Enterprise books because I was running out of books. So finally, I got a chance to go and go back and watch it. I think the year after I graduated from college and had gotten married, and watched it all in one fell swoop, just so that I could start reading those books. And it did have some ups and downs, and I was more used to the way in which that Star Trek had formulated itself from its inception via the way it was depicted in the books. Because for the longest time, we had the better part of 25, 30 years that was completely without anything before Kirk and Spock. And so the books really did cover that with, Star Trek Federation, I believe, it's Starfleet Year One. And then some of the things for like SCE Foundations, those kind of covered those earlier things. And of course, just like how with Star Wars, after they did the first 3, people kept on writing stuff afterwards, and they would sometimes cover things that would come before episodes 4, 5, and 6. And so as soon as Lucas released his prequels, it kind of made those, rendered those books, moot. And so you kind of have this divergent, canon going on as to, okay, so how do we try to bring all these things in line? And for Star Trek, it really wasn't all that important because of the fact that the books weren't nearly as popular because they were kind of a supplemental thing for all the stuff that was on TV and in the movies. Whereas for Star Wars, there was a huge 15-year gap hiatus, and the only thing that people had to consume was the books. So the EUs for both those universes kind of, don't hold the same sway. But I think it kind of was something that ticked a lot of people off when they were like, this isn't the way that Starfleet started. So, yeah. But yeah, mainly, that's kind of the way in which that it's gone until, they released the new movies, of which I don't know if you actually want to get into that can of worms, but I'll leave that.
We'll get to that eventually. And I have lots of swear words to say about it, as does my partner.
Yeah, I think that there's a very rare 4 or 5 people that I think that we all associate with on the irregulars page that hold all the same feelings that we do.
Yeah, I could probably name them off. Jamie, Abraxas, yeah.
I know that Antonio has some very choice words about that as well.
Oh yes. we don't bring up the new franchise around Antonio. He swears in flavors that of Mexican I didn't know existed. So you're more remembered. Sorry, my brain just. Bleh. You're more of the TNG, as you were saying.
Yeah, TNG and Deep Space Nine really were my go-tos, mainly because of the fact that TNG was coming out when I was really getting into Star Trek. And so that kind of was my first love, and I would go back and I would consume the movies and stuff like that. Deep Space Nine came into its, major story arc right around the time where I was able to start understanding what made for good storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons why I appreciated that. When it went back to, with Voyager and kind of became the whole Monster of the Week episode, Ship in a Bottle episode, stuff like that, and really kind of retreaded itself a number of times with characters that really weren't all that interesting. That's kind of where I, flitted off and kind of just ensconced myself in that time period of 1987 to 1992. So,
Voyager was good. I enjoyed it better than I did than Deep Space Nine, but DS9 I was more of a Babylon 5 fan.
Ah, okay.
And we all know how that particular debate goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Who stole from who, and who was developing what, and all that type of stuff. And
my problem with DS9 is it became too much of a soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
The stories became, especially when they had the religious leader on the show.
Kai Opaka?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It became this heavy-handed lack of joy.
Yeah. Well, and
Star Trek has a lot of things going for it. It can hit high notes, it can hit low notes, but it always has that hope for humanity feel.
Yeah.
Except for the DS9 series, in a lot of ways.
And it's because of the fact that it takes a tactic that not a lot of that not a lot of Star Trek had focused on by that point. Because this was the thing, Roddenberry, from what I've read and from what I know, was very much utopia. Human beings are, gotten to a point where they are always moral, they're always forthright. They do the right thing, like as Picard says in Star Trek First Contact, we no longer, seek revenge and things like that.
Except they do, and First Contact went against so many of the set trends in the TNG movie itself.
Right. But if you also notice, it's one of the ones that is one of the more popular ones. And, whether that's because of the fact that they finally felt like they got their own actual movie, whereas Generations to some kind of felt like an extended episode, or if it's because of the fact that it decided to start exploring some of those more nuanced topics of, revenge and humanity and morality and things like that. Deep Space Nine was really, this big departure when it started to get into that arc and really started exploring some very interesting, arcs of personality and, humanity is fallible and stuff like that. And it's actually a really interesting anecdote. I don't remember. I think it was Rick Berman or it was Brandon Braga. But they were talking about when they would go in and write stuff for Deep Space Nine after Gene Roddenberry had passed away. And there was a bust of Gene Roddenberry that they used to have in the writer's room. And whenever there was something that would come up that was not in line with the way in which that Gene had initially determined how humanity and Starfleet and stuff like that were going to conduct themselves, they had a little blindfold that they put over Gene and tied that off and then continued talking. And so it was one of those where you have this conflict of what did the progenitor intend versus the life that it took on its own. Because, when you get to a franchise that now is almost spanning 50 years, there's got to be some diversity. Because if you keep on telling the same stories about these people who are completely amazing and have no faults, it starts to get kind of boring.
Except TNG really started that trend of, I'm just disagreeing with you, started that trend about what is human, what is, we are not perfect, but we're trying.
Yeah.
Especially around season 3, they really started that. So I understand what you're saying about DS9, but I'm going to disagree with you on that point. I'm going to say it's TNG that did that more than started that more than DS9.
Oh, yeah, and the reason being is because what happened around season 3, that was, I believe, 87 to 88, 88 to 89, 89 to 90. Gene passed away in season 4. Yeah. So it's, that's when they started to say, okay, the reins are off. Let's start doing some interesting stories to be able to explore that. And yeah, I'll agree. It's far more dark and, and kind of, I don't necessarily agree that it's joyless, but, Deep Space Nine definitely does take a different tactic where it goes the full gamut of, political machinations as well as political problems, as well as, having to, live in harmony or disharmony as it ends up happening. And when you're kind of doing a show, a week that takes place with different alien civilizations, across this various, alpha quadrant range, you don't have very much opportunity to be able to do very long story arcs that will show some kind of effect. Now, they tried doing that as much as they could with things like the 2 and 3 parters of Redemption, and then kind of the Klingon Civil War arc that came about every once in a while. And, people did grow in fits and starts, but for the most part, there was a kind of a status quo that kind of had to be achieved by the end of it. With Deep Space Nine, they wanted it to be in the realm of, okay, these people are going to have things happen to them and they're going to change. And nobody is going to be the same at the end as they were at the beginning. Because that's kind of the way that, everyday life works, much less a good story. You definitely want to see a dramatic through line take effect and be able to present itself and have somebody have to deal with those changes. Now, granted, they didn't always succeed in certain respects. One thing that pops up that is a real big red flag on that is the episode Hard Time of Deep Space Nine, where Chief O'Brien was put into, 25 years of prison that had been compressed into a 3-hour jolt to his brain and memory centers. And so it went through this beautiful storyline talking about his PTSD and his hallucinations that he's having with HR, showing up and all that type of stuff. But the problem is that at the end of the episode, they kind of said, oh, well, okay, he's not going to commit suicide, so that's all well and good. But you never see any effect of any of that throughout the rest of the series, which seems like that would have been a real big frickin' deal to be able to have somebody who's been to prison for 25 years, and how will that affect them for the rest of their life? But it just seemed like after that episode they threw it away.
Well, they kind of had to, because the American era at that time was leaning more towards there's no effect from prison, just put him away. That whole attitude pervaded our whole culture. Yeah. They didn't want to talk about it. We as a nation didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we're still having a hard time with that conversation.
Yeah. And, and the thing is that, it did try to cover, and they've been doing that since, day one. I mean, Majel Barrett Roddenberry, went on record in the documentary Trekkies, talking about the fact that when Gene wanted to talk about race relations, he knew that he was going to get thrown back, criticism from the network. And he wasn't going to be able to show those things on TV. And so the way in which that he was able to show that stuff with racism, he got Frank Gorshin, painted one side of his face black and the other side of his face white, and then got the other guy and painted one side of his face white and the other side of his face black. And lo and behold, you're talking with two aliens, but it's essentially the same kind of conversation that they're having about, civil rights back in the 60s when that was going on. And so that kind of genius of talking about things that nobody really wants to talk about under the veil of science fiction has not only been something that, has gone throughout science fiction for, hundreds of years by this point, because it's a way in which that you can make veiled references or, allegory. There still is some stuff that is taboo that even they wouldn't touch. Like, I remember, what was it? It was the episode of Deep Space Nine that was actually almost as bold as the one episode that they had of TNG, which kind of didn't do all that well, or at least was kind of patronizing in its execution. And that is LGBTQ stuff. They tried touching on that a little bit in TNG when they were talking about the race that didn't really have a gender, and
the androgynous ones, and then she was actually female and chose to be female.
Yes.
What was the name of that episode?
I'm pretty sure it. Top of my head, God, and I used to be so good at this too.
Oh, you and me both, and then my brain went, we're done.
Yeah. But it was, I think it was the, I don't know. I'll probably remember it here in a minute or so. But it was basically, that whole thing of she wanted to be a certain gender, but society didn't allow for that. And the whole problem that cropped up with it was that, nobody really wanted to talk about LGBTQ stuff. So that was the best that they could do to get away with it. And
that was more of a transgender thing than an actual sexual orientation thing.
Right. Yeah. And, sex in general kind of has been, outside of, in a joking manner, kind of a taboo thing to talk about on Star Trek. And mainly it's because of the fact that they still want to be in some semblance of a family show. The Outcast. It was called The Outcast.
That it was.
Yes. But they would talk about it in certain respects of, the Klingon, mating rituals and things like that, as well as, various stuff, and most of that stuff was all covered in Deep Space Nine, usually, and it was mainly between Jadzia Dax and Worf when they were getting into their relationship. But
it was handled so clunkily. I mean, it was just.
And it's purely because of the fact that you don't want to ruin the mystery. First of all, heck, they did that for years with why did the Klingons look different in TOS versus in anything after the motion picture. Yes, it was a makeup budget. Oh no, it was the 6 different things that possibly could have happened.
We don't talk about it, as Worf said.
Yeah, precisely. We don't talk about it with outsiders. But it's also it's a standards and practices thing, as well as the fact that that there was some fear of any type of backlash. It needed to be able to talk about important topics, but if you couldn't veil it enough, then it would become problematic, and then you'd have people writing letters. But when you're talking about Deep Space Nine, the way in which they tried to handle it was with the episode where Lenara Khan came back, who used to be the wife of one of the Dax symbiont's hosts, and Jadzia and Lenara kind of try to have a professional relationship, and the feelings come back, and then it ends up that they have an emotional moment and they end up kissing, which was one of the first female female kisses on television, and kind of redoing that history of the first interracial kiss on television between Uhura and Kirk from the episode where they were under the mind control.
Yeah, the gods one.
Yeah.
Of course, my brain goes blah. I will admit DS9 did one thing right, and that was their green screen and redoing the cast when they went back to Tribulations with Tribbles.
Oh, yes. Yes.
They got the colors right. They got the movement right. They got the fighting right. They did the study on it, and that was great.
Mm-hmm.
The story itself was decent.
Yeah. The nice thing was, I think, for that one is that they were at least able to still have the original writer, help out with that. Because David Gerald, who's still alive and well today and causing almost as much trouble as Harlan Ellison is on Facebook, he helped pen that and helped, make sure that it integrated properly. There were some aspects of it that I agree, in retrospect are kind of clunky, the reasoning behind certain people coming back to that point in time and whatnot. But it was all done for a number of reasons. And, if you look at some of the major things that have happened milestone-wise in Star Trek, you'll start to notice that a lot of it is done for marketing reasons, which is really interesting. Like the 25th anniversary was a real big milestone for Star Trek. And one of the things that they ended up doing for that was they had Star Trek 6 coming out, as well as the 4th and 5th season of TNG coming out. And so one of the things that they did with that was they had the crossover of Worf as his grandfather showing up in Star Trek 6. And then you had Leonard Nimoy showing up as Spock in the 2-part episode Unification.
But Unification was actually well written.
It was. It
wasn't just... Yes, it was a cash grab. I'm not going to deny it was a cash grab. But it did do the continuity well.
Yeah. And
it kept his character, unlike the movies, Spock.
Mm-hmm.
Because... the movies just, the movies took everything we love about Spock and threw it out the goddamn window.
Well, I mean, that's what happens when you die sometimes. You gotta...
Yeah, I understand that, but... Okay. I love the actor that plays the new Spock. I loved him in Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
I loved him. He doesn't do... Spock's not that emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Spock doesn't sit there and have a fight with his... What they did to our hero was a fucking crime.
Mm.
Sorry. Trying not to... We'll get there. Just...
Well, I mean, the way in which that, if we step back to Trials and Tribulations, it was the 30th anniversary episode. And they kind of went, they tried to go as far out for the 30th anniversary as they did for the 25th. Now, the 25th was kind of at the crux height of Star Trek's popularity when it was kind of almost inundating everything. 30 years was like at the peak of that bubble right before it burst. And so the reasoning behind Trials and Tribulations was, it was kind of a love letter between, how are we going to do this celebration of the 30th anniversary? Well, let's do a crossover with, the original series. And it was also the fact that it was one of the most technologically advanced shows next to Babylon 5, which was using a lot of CGI for its ship work on television. And so they were able to get access to and afford to use the type of technology that was utilized for Forrest Gump, where they ended up putting in
the proper green screen.
The blue screening and the green screening, and seamlessly blend that together so that it didn't look like you were doing flashbacks or back and forths. And so with that, they, were able to do something that was visually stunning and amazing, whereas maybe the story wasn't so completely there. But, for one of those being, because that was the thing, is that you had the serious episodes and then you had the fun episodes. Fun episodes.
I think that was my biggest problem with DS9, is they didn't get that balance right. That it was more about push the serious, over-changing angst. It felt like a teenage angsty show.
Yeah.
And it got to a point that I could get more serious reactions from soap operas than I could DS9. But that's me. I'm in that camp that, okay, I know where this is going to get this one lead. Sisko was an okay captain. I preferred him to Kirk, but I would not want to serve with him. And his actions and attitudes as a character, not as the actor, as the character, I want that understood, poisoned the rest of the series for me. He had this potential with the dislike from the Borg invasion. That was a good backstory to work with.
Yeah.
And then they just dropped the ball. And they made him... I think Jay said it. The other Jay said it best when one of our little joking conversation is, Sisko keeps his pimp hand strong.
Yeah,
yeah.
The only one to keep his ship after that fight. That is Sisko's pimp hand.
Yeah. And this is the aspect that it kind of it dovetails a little bit. In between good character development mixed with the change that they want to have, as well as the fact of how best are you going to portray the very first African American captain, and that's an interesting thing. I'd be really interesting to see what the dichotomy was about in the writer's room, because as far as I know, off the top of my head, there was not, in accepting the, various story treatments that might have been submitted for them to turn into full-blown episodes, I don't think that there was a single person of color that was in that writer's room at all. And that could part and parcel be part of it. It's kind of like,
it was very whitewashed.
Right. What were we getting? Were we getting an actual depiction of how a strong African American leadership figure would react, or are we getting, a whole bunch of white people's version of it? So that might have played into it. The other aspect is too.
I think my problem with it is the writers took him more Black Panther's. What's his name? Not Malcolm X. They pushed it more than the Black Panther Malcolm X portrayal than the Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and it could be part and parcel because of the fact that he was having to be a captain during a time of war, because that's when they were really starting to push that type of stuff, was when they got into the Dominion War. So there's that aspect of it that we've never really seen how a Starfleet captain reacts before Cisco when they are in a constant state of war. And I'm not talking like the war with the Klingons when Kirk would come up against a ship and he and Koloth would have some witty banter and then somebody would fire a photon torpedo.
That was more of the Cold War style, but again,
exactly.
that reflected its time.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of the Soviet threat back then.
And with this one, I mean, whereas we weren't, I mean, I'm sure we were in some Middle Eastern country at that time.
DS9.
Yeah.
The Dominion War happened about the time the original Bush 1 Iraqi war happened.
Okay. So, but even at that was not something that was, I mean, we would see, news reports that would come back about, what was going on in the Middle East and so on and so forth. But the Dominion War, at least the way in which it was depicted, was more of a World War II or Vietnam War type of allegory. And I think that it might have been that they wanted to push that not only because of the fact that, it was the first time that we'd ever be able to see a war, full-blown all-out war in the Star Trek universe, but it might have also been because they could only make veiled references to it back when the original Vietnam War was going on back in the 60s. And, they couldn't actually, show stuff like that because, they'd just gotten over the threat of the communist scare with Huok back in the 50s. And I'm sure that there were a lot of writers that were kind of, scared about which way their loyalties would lie, mainly because of the fact that one of them...
McCarthyism.
Yeah, the McCarthyism is still alive and well because, I mean, as it was, when we were talking about North Korea, or North Vietnam... when we were going in there was the main reason we were trying to usurp the North Korean army or the North Vietnamese army was because they were communists. And so that was very much a very real thing that was going through there. And there were shades of McCarthyism that were still running rampant through that. And, but by the time that, Deep Space Nine had come out, questioning the validity of a war and questioning whether or not we're doing the right thing and, the atrocities that would come with, all-out war were not as taboo to discuss. And they could be discussed openly without anybody questioning your patriotism. Not so much now, but, we then get into, a whole bunch of other, resurgences as to, communism is more or less no longer a major threat. We see it almost now as the failed experiment joke that that
North Korea is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're really. I mean, you've got two sides of the coin. You've got North Korea, which is the continuing communist,
and
aspect,
failing miserably,
and then you've got China, which still has aspects of communism, but they're rapidly becoming more capitalist.
Yeah.
And so, you've got that. And so if you, kind of take jabs at that and then say, well, maybe this isn't so bad, maybe this is good, or yada, yada, so on and so forth, that, nobody here is going to say, oh, you deserve to be put in jail for your opinions about communism. But, if you get into the whole patriotism aspect, that is something that ends up becoming a major, sticking point, a major conversation point.
Which is one of the things I've liked about the Star Trek universe. They've been able to take these subjects and present them in a form for mass consumption that made you think. Without actually... They danced around it just enough that they couldn't be called out on it.
Yeah.
Okay, good example would be the one you were talking about before, The Gods Before Us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the one with Uhura.
Oh, that was Plato's Stepchildren.
Plato's Stepchildren.
Yeah.
Duh. Okay, Gods Before Us was one where they killed Apollo because Kirk's a douche.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, who mourns for Adonis, yeah.
Yeah. Because Kirk's a douche.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no argument there. I don't know. I've got my own stories about Shatner. I'll share those with you if you want.
But, we'll get that. That'd be great. That'd be fun. I just like Shatner as an actor because he took the fandom that had been supporting him through T.J. Hooker, through whatever was after T.J. Hooker, through all this, and then shat all over us on Saturday Night Live on national TV. So, and he's always been a douche to his fans. So fuck him.
There's,
but I wasn't talking about Shatner. God damn.
Yeah.
I was talking about the character Kirk.
Yeah.
He should have never been a captain. That is just a flat out. That is the last man you want in charge of a ship. He's an example of middle management failing its way up.
Yeah. If you think about it from that perspective, yeah. And if you look at it from the original story treatment, the way in which that Gene Roddenberry pitched it to NBC executives was that he was going to be like Horatio Hornblower. Now, I have no idea outside of the name and the general veiled references to who Horatio Hornblower was and how he acted. But, if you take a look at the number of times that Kirk violated the Prime Directive...
Sorry about that.
Okay. So, but, it's like, if anybody acted like that on any type of military ship, they would be court-martialed, sectioned 8, within a New York minute. But, they kind of played it off in the sense of, he's away from Starfleet. He makes calls home every once in a while, but because he's out there and he's, not having to report to anybody, he's got to make those decisions, decisions of life and death just, as they are happening. And he doesn't have time to get confirmation and permission and stuff like that.
Except he should have known what to do because there was a Prime Directive. There was rules for it. There was precedence for 90% of the things he did that he fucking ignored.
Yeah, and I mean, even at that, it wasn't necessarily detailed in the series itself, but by that point, even if you look at when Starfleet Academy was created, because they had a triangular insignia for it, and I think that the date that it has on there is for 2161, and when Kirk's supposed to be taking place is in 2266. So there's been 105 years of Starfleet out there in the stars. By the point that we went from 1776 to 1876, there was definitely a well-enforced military code of justice that would be able to put, captains who were rebellious to that level in their place and court-martial them. But just Kirk kind of just has to fly that devil-may-care, I'm going to go do what I'm going to do for the best of everybody. And yeah, it definitely is one of those where, he may have been whip smart and he may have had, the diplomatic abilities to be able to, strike deals and make sure that wars wouldn't occur. But sometimes the way in which he did that was very, very tenuous in terms of, legal, culpability, as well as, if somebody didn't just say, "Oh, Kirk, you're right. I'm sorry, we were wrong," that, he could have started a number of wars with any new species that he decided to come up with.
The ones that he didn't flat out kill right off the bat.
Well, yeah, and the nice thing though about the ones of which that he would, that he would take out or disable or kill, I mean, you got to admit, 50% of those were sentient computers that were, performing one form of fascism or another. Again,
the message was there, a little heavy-handed, but it was there. I understand that.
Yeah, but I agree that there were some that when he would get to Apollo and Who Mourns for Adonis, or when he would be dealing with the Klingons out on the frontier, or when he'd be dealing with any energy being that, decided that they wanted to suck the lifeblood out of any of his crew. There was a lot of room for improvisation that he took definite advantage of. And, you can explain it away from multiple perspectives. You can say, well, he had no choice. On the flip side of it, one of the things that I like to do, especially being, a theater person myself, and having to explain myself for decisions that I make as an actor or as a director or as a potential screenwriter or scriptwriter or something like that, is, if he always followed the rules, it might be boring, we got the boilerplate. Oh, he met another species and he was friendly with them, and they had some weird cultural mores of which he completely rebuffed and decided that he would be better off moving away rather than actually pursuing those dilithium mining rights. I mean, and it was also a very, it was a very 60s mentality too.
Yeah.
Because, we were going in playing policeman of the world for a lot of stuff. I mean, Vietnam is a very, good example of that. But, there was also Korea and, a number of other, police actions of which we had deployed troops and gone in to go and either help or, get into fights with people. And, there was a very brash 60s mentality of the USA is right. We have the might to back it up. So therefore, we're going to go do what we think is best for the rest of the world. And that's one of the reasons why, we cultivated as many people who thought the United States was batshit crazy with its jingoistic patriotism as we did. That, came back to bite us on the ass in several occasions. But, it was one of those
Still
things
biting
where...
us in the ass.
Oh, yeah, totally. And, and we're trying to make do with that as best as we can, especially from a perspective of people who are not in charge. The cultural, aspect is kind of shifted to, instead of it being a kind of culturally accepted norm, you have now two factions where you've got, groups of Americans who are very, let's go in and, let's do what we can and, and
we have
might makes right,
We have the shift we're starting the shift from Picard... No, I'm sorry, from Kirk to Picard.
Yes.
As a nation.
Yeah. But then you've got, the people that are like Cisco on a certain level. And this is a very interesting parallel. There was an episode of, actually a story arc in Deep Space Nine that dealt with the Maquis. And one of the leaders that was kind of the face for this was Michael Eddington. And he was the spy that got planted on Deep Space Nine, who was kind of the de facto leader, trying to get his people, all that stuff. And there was an episode for the uniform where Eddington goes off to go and finally ditch Starfleet and say, you know what, I'm not going to be a spy anymore. I'm going to go full time and we're going to go on the offensive and all that type of stuff. And Cisco's got this huge speech about, you've betrayed us and, your ideals are wrong and, you've done everything that, it's like, I understand the things that you want to do and I want, a toilet seat made out of gold, but, we can't do that in this atmosphere. We need to make sure that we're, taking care of treaty violations and making sure they don't happen and so we don't get into a war and so on and so forth. And, completely discounting the very physically observable atrocities that are happening to these people that are being displaced on multiple levels. And so, you see a lot of that starting to happen, nowadays. I mean, it's a little bit more patriotic, or veiled in the flag type of stuff, when you get those kind of people ranting and raving online or, talking about, the way in which the United States should conduct themselves. But it's an interesting facet of Cisco that he kind of portrays that aspect of I'm blindly going in with these ideals of
he's being a flag waver.
Yeah, definitely. And it works on the level of the way in which he feels like he has to act in being this leader of this nexus of where everything's happening, because everything's centered around Bajor, everything's centered around the wormhole, all that. And so, he feels in a certain way that it's like, well, if I'm not the representation of Starfleet and all of its ideals, then, I'm going to fail at my job here. But it does, on a certain level, get a little bit too much into the jingoistic aspect. But, it's tempered with some of the people that are way more over the line. There's the 2-part episode, Homefront and Paradise Lost, where you've got Admiral Layton, who wants to impose martial law on Earth because he's so damn afraid of changelings. And that kind of is a very good allegory to put with, the way in which that people want Muslims to be treated in this country like they're all a potential terrorist rather than basing them on their own merits of who they are as human beings and the actions that they actually do perform rather than lumping them all in with a potential enemy. And so it kind of tempers Cisco's,
I'll put an addendum on that. It tries to. It doesn't.
Oh, tries to. Yeah. I mean, there's numerous circumstances where we're kind of faced with Cisco being the flag waver, more so than anybody else. But I mean, then it comes down to
I think that's what really, like I said earlier in the show, that is what bothers me the most about DS9. Is I understand where the writers were trying to come from.
Yeah.
But it just poisoned the whole show for me personally. That this character was in charge in what was essentially a militarized diplomatic base. South Korea. A good allegory would be like South Korea, because we have the military there. We're there as an ally. We're there to help. But if we had someone like that in, say, South Korea, what would happen?
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm just thinking back to all of the crap that's going on over in that section of the world right now.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There were two. I love my iPhone because I've got my CNN application on there, which is just it's there for hilarious reasons on a certain level.
It's more honest than Fox.
This is true, but I got two notifications because it'll do breaking news and headlines and it'll notify me, and two that have happened within the past 48 hours. One was North Korea claims that it's been able to miniaturize nuclear weapons, and taken on its face, it's kind of like, oh, isn't that cute? They've miniaturized nuclear weapons, but it's also one of those where it's like, oh shit, in what way have they been able to miniaturize the nuclear weapons, and how are they going to deploy them?
Yeah.
And then there was another one that was a breaking news this afternoon, which was about the fact that there was some flyover by some military aircraft in the South China Sea, because there's apparently been some Chinese military buildup on some of the man-made islands out there, and they were rebuffed something like 8 times to not do flyovers, even though, for all intents and purposes, those places are recognized as international waters, not Chinese territory. And, luckily nobody fired anything, but it was one of those where if it had just been pushed a little bit more, or if they were a bit better deployed out in that area, we could have had the Chinese military firing on American planes. And so
that's something that hasn't happened since World War II.
Right, precisely. And so, you gotta really wonder, it's like, if we've got people out there that are the more diplomatic type, where it's like, okay, guys, you're breaking a treaty here. We don't want to get into a fight. Let's sit down and talk this out and see if we can hash it out. Or, oh no, we're being fired at. Fire back before, ever confirming anything with base, because of the fact that you're under fire, even though you've got an escape route. We could be really screwed, and the next thing that we know is that nothing is being made in China anymore. They've closed all their borders, and we've angered about 1 billion people who are, going to come knocking at our doorstep. So, right now it's one of those tenuous situations that it makes for good headlines, but it's also one of those, what was the thing from Watchmen where we're 5 minutes from midnight? Yeah. I don't even know where our doomsday clock is now.
3 minutes from midnight between pollution, nuclear threat, and diplomatic talks.
Yeah. So.
Not that I keep an eye on that at all. So, we've talked a lot about DS9.
Yeah.
Star Trek, the original series, was, we all agree, very groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
It tackled a lot of things. Star Trek The Next Generation. Your guys' opinion. Did it keep that tradition of talking about things that are happening in the real world while entertaining enlightenment? That's the best way to put it. Did they keep that tradition?
Yeah. Edutation, as I think the phrase was coined back in the 90s. I don't know. I think so. I think they were more vague about it, or at least just as vague as they were trying to be back in TOS's day. They did try to touch on certain subjects that were pretty relevant. I remember that there's that episode that was it was either a first or second season episode called Symbiosis.
Awesome.
Which was specifically talking about, or at least it really wanted to talk about the AIDS crisis, and it ended up becoming, I think, more along the lines of a anti-drug episode.
That one was interference by executives.
Oh yeah, well, because what was it? It was it was Fire Blood or something like that, or Fire in the Blood.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be the specific AIDS one, and it was actually supposed to be an LGBTQ story. And it actually, interesting side note, the trivia on that is when Star Trek Phase 2, the web series, came out, they took unproduced TOS scripts, of which Fire in the Blood was one of, that would never have been produced back in the 60s or the 70s. And they actually did, as written, that episode. But it was initially going to be retrofitted into Symbiosis. And that was one of the reasons why they got Merritt Buttrick, because Merritt Buttrick, who played Kirk's son in Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, was actually somebody who died of AIDS himself.
Yeah.
And so that was going to be one of those 1-2 punches of, okay, we've got an actual gay actor here who's going to be able to portray this very, very interesting storyline of the AIDS epidemic that's going on. And of course, it was still wait, no, you can't do that on television, and the whole thing ended up getting changed to Symbiosis, which was more, because it was in the Nancy Reagan era, was more the anti-drug, drug abuse resistance education type stuff. So, they did try to touch on, on stuff like that, the common issues. Some that were just too hot to talk about, I think get passed by. But it was also, I think, a function, because if we're going back to the production aspect of it, it was a function too of they were in syndication. There wasn't just one channel that TNG was on back in the 80s and the 90s.
No.
It went out to affiliates all over. And so you never knew if there was going to be an episode of something that was going to show up in San Francisco that would, go great on KBHK TV 44 Channel 12.
God, I haven't seen that in forever. Channel 44.
Oh, yeah.
San Jose native, so yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm originally from the East Bay area, so, I got a lot of that stuff. But,
so 44, 3 in the afternoon, Voltron.
Yep. 7 o'clock on Thursdays, you got your brand new TNG.
Oh, yeah.
But if you show that same episode, if it went over like gangbusters in San Francisco, but if you showed it in the depth of Tennessee.
No, you don't even have to go that far. You just have to go 400 miles north of my current location, Gridley, California.
Oh, yeah. Or heck, go.
We're talking right-wing extremist area, my area.
Yeah, 150 miles west of Eugene, where I'm living now. You get over into that, Bend farm town area and stuff like that. I remember driving through there for a theater tour, and I was just aghast because it was right about the time when I think Proposition 8 was going through in California or something like that, and there were just so many, extreme conservative right-wing political signs that were up. And I was just amazed because I'd never really been outside of Eugene and Portland in the Oregon area. And I thought, well, the whole state's blue. We're all very progressive in that sense. But you got out there and it was like, no way. My God, they'd shoot you as soon as look at you type of thing.
And these are the episodes you have to get through to these people.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the ones that they absolutely do need to see so that they can, have that. But the thing is that, people in general aren't stupid. And so even though that they could technically get by with certain things at the censors, there's a lot of people that are, they may hold views that are outdated or, Neanderthalific, in a certain sense, but are still relatively intelligent that they can see through allegory, and they'll definitely pull those because they don't want to anger the constituency. And so, they tried to cover certain topics in TNG that were global issues, or, they were very targeted United States issues, but they weren't something that was so incendiary that it would cause a problem or cause a panic. And even at that, there are some shows that were put out back then that during the current climate, you might be hard pressed to get away without, having there be some
lynched.
some kind of firestorm, at least on the internet. If you brought up, the Klingon Civil War stuff that's going on in TNG during seasons, 4 and 5 and 6, that could be seen as some kind of like assault on,
the Iranian situation.
Well, or the South. How many times has Texas, said, "Oh, we're going to secede from the Union," type of thing, and that's that's something that could be taken away from those episodes. Is that oh, you're commenting on this very hot button issue that is going to get a lot of people pissed off. But I think on a certain level, they were able to do a lot of stuff tactfully. And there's some stuff that is just human condition, that is very important to be able to discuss and talk about, but is not necessarily something that is targeting directly a current climate problem. And because you get certain things like, Family, the episode that came out right after Best of Both Worlds 2-parter ended. And the main crux of that is not only dealing with difficult family members, but it's also about, somebody who's gone through a really horrific situation having the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder and how they deal with that. And, and that is kind of a general thing that has been going since at least, World War II, if not before. It really was something that was identified during, Vietnam era, I think.
It was called shell shock back in World War II.
Right.
It wasn't understood. It was considered... Patton was known to literally throw men and beat men for having PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
My views on Patton are another show. Hi, kiddo. But, yeah. There was a lot of misconception, a lot of misunderstanding. And it just shows, like... And I'm in the camp that even though it's art, it educates.
Mm-hmm.
If good art makes you think, makes you feel. Bad art, at best, entertains you.
Yeah. Well, look at the proliferation of reality television.
I said art, not torment.
Well, yeah.
Torturous hell.
As I said on the Facebook page the other day, we're Americans. We don't torture by showing kids 50 Shades of Grey in school. But yeah, no, it's and there were certain things that it would cover, in terms of tolerance, I think, on a general level.
Which is something that we have to keep preaching because
Yeah.
our natural inclination is no. As humans, that's just.
And that's one thing that I really like that a lot of people don't mention about TNG was Picard was portrayed as human through having a secondary character.
Mm-hmm.
He had Troy on deck all the time as the counselor, not just for the crew, but for himself.
Right.
He was flawed. He was a human in power, where we didn't see that with Kirk very often. Kirk was larger than life.
Oh, well, Kirk did have some of those moments, but the problem was, as opposed to actually having a counselor that would be able to talk him through it and, be able to make sure that he had an outlet for those feelings and the ability to deal with them, there were numerous times where he would get all depressed and emo and go sit in his quarters and drink. And that's another thing too, is that it goes with the mentality of the time. In the 80s, for somebody to be able to have an advisor, especially somebody who might, be trained in psychology or psychotherapy or something like that, to be able to give him the advice that he needed and to keep him balanced and sane. Back in the 60s, you bottled everything up. And, if you needed a release, you went and you drank. If you look at things like Mad Men, that is something that is very rife that's running through that whole period of time. That's at least the most modern explanation that I can get of it. But with Picard, it was very much, we need to work this out so that I can keep level headed because I'm in charge of 1,700 people. And if I don't keep an even keel, I could blow up basically what is a floating sea. Whereas, with Kirk, product of the 60s, with a slight futuristic bent to it, but he dealt with his problems the way in which that they would have during that period of time and what was considered culturally acceptable. So,
or to put it in another way, he's a man, damn it.
Or precisely, yeah.
But yeah,
he also was throughout the show portrayed as bigger than human at times. The charisma that he had,
yeah,
his ability to make a rash decision and have it come out right.
Correct.
Whereas Picard was very much a person.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I know a lot of people rag on Troy because she was a, quote, useless character to a lot of people, but she played that part very well. She was a very good balance for showing him at a real human level, which was very subtle on their part to have her there because you didn't think about it. She was there. She was a cast member, but the effects she had were so large.
And especially because it seemed like in the change between TOS and TNG, that there was this shift of we are mainly diplomats now. Something tells me that, if Roddenberry had gotten his way, that, if it wasn't for the fact that it provided good action, that, he might have sent the Enterprise D out there with no phaser banks, with no photon torpedoes. And it was, just meant to be that we talk our problems out now rather than getting into, skirmishes and wars and altercations. And the thing that Troy brought to that was a backup for the immense diplomatic skills that Picard had and showcased on a regular basis, rather than the martial skills that Kirk was better known for. Kirk was a very good tactician, and it was something that was even lauded in the sense of when they were talking about the Kobayashi Maru. They're talking about the fact that he changed the rules of the game, but he was still one of the most brilliant tacticians to ever go through there. And, and when he was doing like war games with, when he was going up against the M5 computer, in the Ultimate Computer, it was one of those where you're pitting the ultimate military commander against, a machine, and we're going to sort out who's going to win. The diplomacy aspect was sometimes brought up on Kirk's part, but usually it was in the sense of, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with your society and why you should make it right and why you should, come more in line with the Federation ideals. Whereas Picard kind of was saying, look, there's a peaceful way for us to be able to deal with all this stuff. And if I don't have to fire a single phaser, then, all the better. And I mean, I'm sure that there's somebody out there who's done some kind of statistical breakdown, comparatively to the...
A Star Trek nerd doing statistical breakdowns? No.
I know, yeah. Well, hell, I wouldn't even put it past BuzzFeed at this point. But, if you take a look at the 79 episodes of the original series and statistically break it down versus the 128 episodes or 148 episodes of TNG and notate the number of times that, there was some fist fight or there was a weapon fired on TOS versus the number of times that there was a weapon fired or some kind of physical altercation in TNG, it would be wildly, disproportionate comparatively in the sense that, TOS almost always, like Kirk was always getting into a fist fight. Picard almost always was talking the problems out. And usually, if you actually think about it, most of the times when weapons were fired, it was usually when Picard had happened to go down on an away team mission or was off the ship and Riker was in charge. Because that was the kind of position that Riker took. You go from Picard, who's the diplomat, to this, I don't want to say carbon copy clone of Kirk in Riker.
We'll call him second generation, because he did mellow with time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was Kirk in the first officer's chair.
Oh, yeah. He was the ladies' man. He was the guy that was, always getting into the fist fights, because Worf would always get his ass kicked. He'd be the guy that would, always, shoot first, ask questions later type of thing. And so, yeah, they still wanted to have that, excuse me, that aspect there, I think, because of the fact that they needed to keep some action-oriented aspect to the show.
Well, that and it did suit the fact that at the time, we're transitioning more from the fighting people to the diplomats, but the fighting people were still in charge of a lot of things,
right?
But in the number 2 position.
Yeah.
So it did suit the times.
Yeah, and it then pervaded itself when you get into Deep Space Nine, because Sisko definitely wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that he actually went down and got into a fist fight, shot a phaser, or, you know, even at that beam down for an away team mission when he should have been in charge of Deep Space Nine or the Defiant.
Yeah.
But then even if you go as far as going into
Janeway, my favorite captain.
Going to Janeway, they almost. This is one of the things that I have to say about Janeway in terms of a captain is that they were able to balance that out. You know, she knew when it was time to be able to, you know, step back and take the diplomatic position, but she also knew when it was time to be marshal and then to step up and actually do stuff. Frankly, I don't think that they did her a lot of justice in, you know, showing her to be, a strong marshal, you know, presence, but
I'll put it this way. I love Janeway's concept, and I think the actress Kate Mulgrew did a fantastic job with what she was given.
Yeah.
And the flat-out truth is the writers, once again, like they did with Sisko, fucked it up. And I'm a big Janeway fan, and I'm a big Voyager fan. But they did tread a lot of things through the white male goggles.
Oh, yeah.
And it showed.
Oh, yeah. And you know, that's when you start getting into, you know, this aspect of, you know, point of view. And, you know, I guess the question would end up being, you know, nowadays, you know, how would that be depicted differently? You know, the fur recently that's been cropping up, I've seen a lot, especially in geekdom. And I think it really... I don't know where it started. It didn't start with this, but at least over the past month and a half, 2 months, it's really gotten, you know, to be a big forefront issue in the nerd community and geek community with the Black Widow fiasco, and then, you know, now it's kind of morphed itself into the recency of Mad Max with Imperator Furiosa and the guys from Return of the Kings getting all uppity about that. And then most recently, Game of Thrones' last episode that they showed on Sunday with the rape of Sansa Stark with Ramsay Bolton. And so, you know, there's a very different narrative that is being, you know, portrayed nowadays. And it would just be interesting, you know, how would Janeway be portrayed differently, you know, with that kind of narrative going on nowadays. Now, they never really did her as a woman in a refrigerator ever. So, you know, that's at least, you know, a positive note that you've got in that. But, you know, I mean, they very rarely, if ever, dealt with any type of, like, you know, Janeway in a sexual situation that would compromise her character, or, you know, the way in which that, you know, is she front and center? Is she actually being respected as the captain or not? And it does become a problem if you don't have
that. A lot of that problem that you're talking about came from up top with warning to the writers, keep the gloves on.
Yeah.
Because Janeway was a female captain. And I hate to do this, but it was a lot of sexism the other direction for that. Especially the overprotective sexism. The yes, we can show her strong, but we can't put her in that. The White Knight Syndrome problem is basically the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And it hampered her development as a character in a lot of ways. Because of those directives from up top. Don't show her in a sexualized and compromising position. Don't show her in a way that will actually... You had some really great performances for her. But she was really hampered as a character and as a actor because of the directives from the brass.
Yeah.
And it showed. You know...
Yeah, and I mean, they did, you know, I can't remember specific episodes because that's a bit spotty for me. I think I only watched through the entire series a total of like maybe once or twice. But, you know, I do recall that there were certain episodes where, you know, there were alien species who wouldn't deal with her because she was a woman. And so with that, she had to overcome that sexism. But it was still the boilerplate, sexism, I think, that was coming over from the 80s and the 90s, where, all of a sudden in the 80s you were starting to see women in, managerial positions and positions of power, wearing pants. Oh God, it's the end of the world type of thing. And I think that you're right that they did eventually, that they didn't go as far as they could have, and they didn't, make certain portrayals in the way in which that they should have. But they still did touch on certain aspects of it, but it was very hands off. Yeah,
and which was really a disservice to the franchise, because Star Trek has always, with the exception of the new movies, been about taking on the issues of the day and making you think about them.
Yeah.
And the Janeway was a great character. I loved Janeway. I loved a lot of her except fucking Harry Kim. That useless bastard. The only one more useless than Harry Kim was B'Elanna Torres.
He had a use. He had a use in that he could die and keep coming back.
Yes.
Yes, he was the ultimate red shirt.
Well, it's actually really interesting that you bring up Harry Kim, because there's some weird anecdotal evidence or a conversation that came up about that. That apparently it came down to who are we going to get off the ship so we can make way for 7 of 9. Because, we need boobs to get people in the seats because it's not doing it with Janeway or something like that. And so it was between Harry Kim and Jennifer Lean, who played Kes. Now, the story that's the official story goes is that the writers felt they had written themselves into a corner with Kes. They, kind of had exhausted all of their, possible storylines that they could have for Kes, because she had such a short lifespan. She was kind of designed for the show in the sense of, if we run 7 seasons, we'll be able to get her from birth to death in that period of time and make it awesome. But, there were some people that said, well, we didn't really have very many more things that we could do with Kes to make her interesting, which I think is bullshit.
There was a lot they could have done with Kes, but she was not the strongest character.
No, she wasn't. But, that was not necessarily even the actress's fault, and I don't think necessarily deserving of writing her off of the show. I think that they could have taken a different tact and probably been able to get some really good stories out of that. But they could
have gotten rid of Neelix.
Well, yeah. Oh, God, yes. But there's the other story. There's actually 2 other stories. There's the other story that the reason why they didn't get rid of Harry Kim, even though he was virtually useless, was because that year he was featured in People's Magazine as one of the sexiest men on television. I think he clocked in at like number 15 out of 20 or something like that. And so that was something that was bankable. Oh, we've got one of the sexiest men on television on our TV show. We don't want to get rid of him. And so from purely a marketing standpoint and for trying to get in, the younger viewers who might actually care about that stuff, that was the reason why he wasn't let go. Now, there's the third story that is unsubstantiated except for what I have read on forum boards. And that is that the actor, I think his name is Aaron Ehrenberg or Eisenberg, not the guy who played Nog on Deep Space Nine, but the guy who played Vorik was the nephew or the son of the casting director. And apparently he made some very, very upfront overtures to Jennifer Lean to date him, of which she rebuffed because she just plainly wasn't interested. And apparently he had complained so much and had gotten his mother or aunt, who was the casting director, on his side and said, I want her to go. And because of that, it was handed down that she was to be fired. So it depends upon who you believe, and it depends upon what rumors that you accept. But, there's various levels as to the reasoning why Harry Kim stuck around as opposed to actually getting axed like he was supposed to. Frankly, I think that they should have gotten rid of him, because even in the books, like, he becomes even more of a useless character. When they do the aftermath of the final episode, they did a two-part book series.
Fucking letdown. That was such.
Oh yeah. I didn't even watch the series, for like the last 2 seasons, but I was like in my college dorm and I'm like, okay, I got to turn in for the series finale of Voyager. It's Star Trek. I got to go and watch it. And it was just so absolutely disappointing. But if you read the book, and it was called Homefront and the Farther Shore, those are the 2 books. Harry Kim kind of plays a major role, but the thing is that the only reason why he plays somewhat of a major role is because they turned his girlfriend that he had on Earth, Libby, into this amazing spy Black Widow-esque character who is trying to get the Borg technology for Starfleet intelligence. And even at that, he was so useless. It was almost like a slap in the face to the character, and deservedly so one, in the sense that when he got back, he got promoted. Now, he's been on a ship for 7 years, and he's done numerous things, and miraculously somehow not gotten promoted at all during that time frame. But when he gets back, what does he get promoted to?
Admiral.
Lieutenant JG.
Oh.
And it's just like, dude, he spent 7 years as an ensign, obviously overlooked. Nobody really gave a crap. And then when you finally get a chance to bring him back, do you make him a lieutenant commander? Do you make him a full-blown commander? Does he retire out of the service? What? Nope, we're going to make him a Lieutenant JG. Here's your extra pip that's hollow, my son. It just is like, why? Why bother? The guy should have been gotten rid of so many times ago. It wasn't even funny. But
he should have been the clown.
Yeah. but yeah,
I am a Janeway fanboy. I love joking about how she would wake up and demand her coffee with extra cigarettes in it.
Yeah.
Well, what's the great internet meme that Janeway has? It's a picture of her sitting in the captain's chair, and it says, "There's coffee in that, Nebula."
I was thinking of the one of where Kirk's being all that badass, and Janeway's just like, "Or you'll do what? Sell me a Priceline?"
Yeah. And the problem is too is that she I don't want to say that she became like a comical representation of like what not to do just because they didn't know how to write her all that well. But when you can start making jokes on a certain level of just the way in which that she's portrayed on the series. I mean, I had a running joke that with a whole bunch of my other like nerd friends that were here in town with me that whenever Janeway would be brought up, we would immediately retort with, "Mr. Tuvok, fire a phaser blast over their port bow." Because that was something that she'd always do, firing the warning shot over the port bow. And, and it's one of those where, if you don't develop a character enough, they'll become this parody of themselves that people will be able to take potshots at. And I think that kind of do a disservice. And, and I mean, not necessarily even to single out Janeway. I mean, we got into a whole host of one-note characters within that entire television show that I think was kind of a wasted opportunity. I mean, you had the Doctor, who was this data clone that had,
Okay, I will give them this on Voyager. They did give a lot of growth over the 7 years to the Doctor.
Oh, yeah. And by far, he is one of the best characters on that show. Excuse me. And he had some very excellent episodes. I mean, the one where he creates a family,
yeah,
and B'Elanna retools it so that it's like an actual family rather than the Cleavers. That's a very, very well done episode, and it's got a super dark ending. And I think if you were to do a top 10 Star Trek, out of the 700 some odd hours of television, which were some of the best episodes of Star Trek that ever were put on TV, that were not necessarily edgy, but just really, really well done.
Thought-provoking.
Yeah, thought-provoking, or, brought up something emotional in you to make you actually think about things that are going on in your life and the dynamic of which you interact with people and that you hold views and opinions. I mean, that episode is got to be at least within the top 10, at least not the top 5, at least for me, just because of the fact that, it shows a very true depiction of how, family dynamic doesn't necessarily work out to be this picture perfect, 1950s television family style, to the point where, he's got to sit there and watch his holographic daughter die right in front of him. Mm-hmm. And it's I don't want to say it's disturbing, but it's heart-wrenching. And it really makes you think about, holy crap, if you're a father, it's like right after that episode, you want to go and call your daughter and make sure that she's okay. That type of aspect. And, and he did have a lot of really good episodes, like, like Dear Doctor and what was the one where he had his program deleted? And that because he was constantly trying to figure out the murder mystery.
The one where he let go of the one patient because he knew Carrie Kim better.
Right, precisely. And he got into this feedback loop, and so they shut him down and rebooted him. But meanwhile, he was still trying to figure it out, and he thought that like there was some like weird, some kind of conspiracy going on, and he found out that it was right, but it was because he couldn't function. And so,
Janeway sitting with him, just waiting for him to go through it. That was perfect, and that is exactly what we wanted from Janeway.
Yeah. That's actually that's something that you would more expect from Picard. Yeah. If Data had gotten into that feedback loop, like, if there was a crewman and there was Geordi, and and he had been programmed to make sure and rescue everybody, and he couldn't rescue this woman because he was friends with Geordi, then he could have gotten into the same type of feedback loop. I mean, probably not from that aspect because, if you get into the whole, he's okay with making certain moral choices. I mean, if you take a look at that even too, I mean, there's some very interesting bits and pieces where Data actually shows more humanity of not having to deal with that type of stuff. I mean, the Most Toys, the one that he did with Kivas Fajo where he got kidnapped and then put on display, has got a real moral conundrum at the end of it when he's right about to shoot and kill Kivas Fajo, and he gets transported away. And when he gets back on the ship, it's like, well, there's a weapon being fired in mid-transport. What's up with that? And he's like, I don't know. It must have been a malfunction. And totally
lies.
Lies. And is like, not like, oh, well, I thought that there was going to be no other way out except for killing this guy. So I was ready to do that to be able to get the job done type of thing, versus, I'm just going to keep that to myself, which is something that you'd expect from the Doctor because it seems like he's got more of the emotional capacity, to be able to, function in that regard. But, he can't. He basically, he gets into a feedback loop and he ends up, having to be shut down. So, the Doctor, I would say, was one of the better characters and the more fleshed out characters on there. But, you usually end up getting that with the trope characters that kind of Star Trek, started with Spock being, caught between two worlds and unemotional and trying to balance both of those. And then you've got your Data who's trying to learn what it is to be human and he doesn't have emotions. And then you go to Deep Space Nine where you've got Odo who doesn't know where he comes from and he's trying to integrate with humans, but he's doing a piss poor job at it. And
Odo's whole story arc was done piss poor.
There were aspects of it that were interesting. I think from a general perspective, I don't necessarily think that they gave him the best opportunities, or Rene Auberjonois the best opportunities to be able to act, to act those out pretty well. But there were numerous things that were good and that were bad. I mean, you got the aspect of, he's somebody who is, by the fourth season, he is a defector of the enemy. And how would somebody be treated if there was no way to be sure as to whether or not this person who is apparently working on your side actually is on your side or not? And then having to deal with that kind of discrimination. But there was also the other aspect, too, especially during the episode where the Deep Space Nine gets taken over and the female changeling comes aboard and they link and they do some link for something like 2 days and there's this whole resistance movement that's supposed to be relying on him shutting off the alarms, and instead of saying, oh my god, I did such a horrible thing and somebody's going to be executed for what I did, he just kind of shrugs it off and goes, whatever, I'm with my people.
Yeah.
And then there's the Children of Time episode that a lot of people, I thought it was, pretty harmless at first. And I'm like, oh, love conquers all type of thing. But if you actually go back and think about it, it's one of... it's
darker episodes.
It's a really dark episode. I mean, it's like, if you sit there and you look at it and you're like, okay, name to me a character who has committed genocide on Star Trek.
Odo.
Odo has committed genocide and is one of the lone people to have done that on Star Trek, because in the Children of Time episode, when his older self that finds a way to cope, sends the entire crew back of the Defiant through because he figured out how to get through it, solely because of the fact that he was in love with Kira, that's like... you can't really put the blame on that specific character, because obviously there were hundreds of years that had gone on between, that character of Odo and the older character of Odo. But it still is one of those where it's like, that's messed up. If he would come to the conclusion that him being in love with somebody is worth the lives of, 500 people... I mean, it wasn't billions, thankfully. It was only, a small settlement that, if you take into account... the number of people that, will have children and create a society over a period of, something like, 75 years or something like that, or 100 years, that, it was probably only about 250 to 400 people. But that's still, like, I mean...
You want to talk about going back in time and screwing multiple people up? Let's look at Janeway's story.
Oh, yeah.
14 years she took off their voyage.
Yeah.
Because 7 of 9 died.
Yep.
How many billions of people's lives did she affect with that?
Well, that's true.
I mean, 14 years, they went through the Federation, they went through the Quadrant. They met new people. They introduced technologies and trades to other people, solved problems that infected billions of lives.
Yeah, and averted who knows how many wars. Mm-hmm. Or stemmed some initial small conflict that would have led to the genocide of, an entire species that they never ended up meeting because they took some stupid shortcut through a transwarp conduit. Yeah, it was that is pretty disastrous, and and
I think that's what pissed me off most about that ending. Janeway has been known to say, screw you, my crew comes first.
Yeah.
But to that extent, it just didn't make sense.
Well, take it from this perspective, though, just to play straw man devil's advocate. The closest thing that she ever got to being able to have a kid, because she got ripped away from her boyfriend or husband, Mark, early on, in their relationship.
The useless plot point, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, she never had any other type of relationship after that. Excuse me. At least not something that was, really well fleshed out for a long period of time over the series. But, she never had any type of relationship after that. And I don't want to speak for women of this age group or anything like that. But, there's the general tendency of, she didn't get a chance, and correct me if I'm wrong, because of the fact that this goes back to that damn Black Widow argument of, she didn't get to have a chance to have kids, and so she kind of took 7 of 9 on as this protege that she was trying to teach humanity to, in the same way in which that you would try to teach a child. Now, did she kind of feel like 7 of 9 was her de facto daughter, and so therefore that was the reason why she was willing to alter, all of that timeline and all those people that she was supposed to meet just so that her daughter, in her mind, wouldn't die?
I can see that argument, and I've heard that argument before, but it still doesn't feel like the character would do that,
Oh, yeah.
It really felt like the writers got lazy.
Well, it definitely was, excuse me, a real big, oh shit, we didn't plan this out appropriately. We thought we were going to have more time. How do we get them home, or do we leave them out there? What will be less displeasing to the people that are going to want to watch that season finale and get those ratings? And so, the fact that they weren't planning it out 2 seasons in advance to say, okay, here's the easiest way that we can get them home within the 7-year time frame. That's the culmination of all of that. I mean, frankly, I'm more of the opinion, why did they need to get home? Just leave them out there.
They would have been better.
Yeah.
If they had just left it at the 20-year reunion and had run this story from there,
yeah,
that would have made more sense.
Sure.
Just end it with that 20-year. So-and-so, Janeway's got the Borg tech. She's brought it back. She's teaching it at school. That whole timeline. That made more sense.
Sure. Or even at that, it's like, there's no reason why you can't do I remember the worst decision I ever had to make in my entire life or something like that. And it came down to, her crew or a planet, in bigger ways than had previously been done before or something like that. And so, that might have been, a little bit better to focus on, and then just have it be. And we eventually did get home, but it took us another 7 years to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas, changing the timeline to that kind of drastic extent is, definitely, I mean, it's obviously one of the most egregious violations of the Prime Directive and the temporal Prime Directive that we've ever seen. So,
as a writer and someone that's working his second novel, I find it offensive because it's lazy, and it's piss poor planning. And if you can't plan it properly, don't do it. But that's my writer's sentence. It was okay, but it was just an aggravation against the 5 years you had building these characters.
yeah.
Okay, so we've talked TOS some. We've talked mostly about DS9. We've talked Next Gen. Enterprise.
I'm not super off.
What can be said about that except I need a drink?
That bad, huh?
Well, the alternate universe episodes were somewhat interesting.
Yeah.
Archer was competent. Somewhat.
Well, and mind you, I mean, we're taking it from the standpoint of, he didn't exactly have the rule book. He was kind of out there making it on his own.
Yeah, but it just...
He was a farm boy.
Yeah.
It's the same problem I have with the prequels. It's the same problem I have with these other... If they're not done just right to fit the storyline. The way that they did it well, Agent Carter.
Mm-hmm.
She fits the timeline. It's story, and you know where it's going to end up, where she's going to end up. But her story still fits in with the flow of the universe. Enterprise didn't fit the universe in a lot of ways. When you have to use the holodeck from the Next Generation simulation for your finale,
Mm-hmm.
instead of, having something you can stand on your own, your whole series is just holodeck simulations for the Next Gen. Yeah, it doesn't work right.
Yeah, that was, I think, if anything, the ultimate slap in the face. Because the problem is that it got, started getting better. Really good there by the end. And, they tried to, save it as much as they could. And they're like, nope, it's going to be ending. And instead of actually giving them, the ability to go back and make sure that they had a really good ending on their own that they could stand on and say, this was the end of our show. It just really feels like, well, let's take characters from our absolute best show that we've ever gotten ratings for and shoehorn them in there, amidst a crap episode. I'm sorry. The fact that they were doing it during the midst of the TNG episode Pegasus was just a travesty, because it is not even remotely, like I was trying, as I was sitting there watching the thing, going like, okay, well, how does this really, okay, so he's got to make a tough decision. Sure. But why are we taking a throwaway episode talking about a rogue admiral who developed a cloaking device that's one of these magical hand-waving things to be able to get them out of an asteroid? That's basically the whole plot point for the whole series, or for the whole show, the episode. And, and then trying to shoehorn that in to, this series that is talking about the formative years of the Federation and all of these, landmark things that we're doing. It was just, not only the fact that they did it, they did it with, having to rely on TNG, but just the fact that they didn't even pick a good TNG episode for this to be taking place in between just really seemed like, wow, I guess nobody really does give a shit about Enterprise. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, the characters never got a chance to flesh out. They felt wooden and cardboard the entire run. The stories were predictable at best, groan-worthy at worst. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy Scott Bakula. I liked him in Quantum Leap. I even enjoy him in NCIS New Orleans, which is just sad to say. But he does a good job with that role. He was miscast for Archer. He really was. He didn't know how to do the character. And it really dragged the series down because of that.
Well, and was it because of the fact that he didn't know how to do it, or because of the fact that they really weren't giving him very much to go off of?
They weren't giving anybody anything to work with. It really was a cash grab series.
Well, it was to get on that prequel bandwagon, and that's the thing. This is one of the main things that I hate about prequels, and why I don't think that it's a good idea, really, to do any prequels. Like, as it was, what I see, there was an article today on IO9 or something like that saying that they've already greenlit two more Mad Max films. And I'm like, awesome. That sounds really great. I would love to see more of the same of that from George Miller.
As long as it's alternate timeline.
But that's the thing. They're not. They're prequel films. And I couldn't help but cringe because of the fact that if you want to see something that is the ultimate, oh my God, what have we done prequel, you look at the Star Wars trilogy. And then you go and you look at Enterprise as one of those aspects, and then you go and you look at the new Star Trek in name only films, and none of them have ever really worked. And the reason being, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like prequels, if they're dealing with characters that you already know, or close enough to characters that you already know, or things that have definitely been explained even in vague terms, is they never are going to be as interesting as moving the story along from the point where you started, purely because of the fact that all you're doing with those is you are waiting for
your main character to get there.
Yeah, main character to get there, or for some event that you know that has happened to happen. And so as such, it robs the story of its tension, because if you're seeing something new, you don't know where it's going to go. Whereas if you're seeing a prequel, you're basically saying, well, eventually they have to get to this point where this little kid becomes Darth Vader. And the only thing that you can, at all find interesting about that is that journey. But
which
the
they
shit
did
that I had,
piss poor job of, and we have a 2.5-hour episode of that available on SoundCloud of me and another guest just ranting.
But it's the same thing. With Enterprise, you go back and you look at that. It's like, okay, we know that they're going to eventually meet, the Andorians. We know they're eventually going to meet the Tellarites. We know they're eventually going to form the Federation. Yes, there's more stories that can be told in that vein, but it's kind of like, when they're constantly taking shuttle pods somewhere, it's kind of like, oh, well, we've got this transporter that's over here that we only use for cargo. Well, no,
Why?
duh. We're not going to say, oh, will that transporter work? We don't know. This is a new piece of technology. It's something that we've all known for the better part of 30 years. Yeah, 50 years by this point. And so we're kind of like, well, of course the transporter is going to end up working. It may not work that episode, but we know that it's going to end up working. We know it's going to be something that will become a new form of transportation. And so, the aspect of prequels is that, when you're telling that kind of backstory and it's not just, here's just something to catch you up, it just becomes an exercise in when do we get there?
Yeah.
And if there's anything about journeys, and this goes all the way back to when you're a kid taking a trip with your folks, is that are we there yet? Is the most annoying fucking thing that can be said in the car during the journey.
Except of course, what about 11sies? Sorry. Talking about a long journey, so that joke had to be said.
I'm just kind of sad even the Mad Max creators can't get beyond Thunderdome.
Yes.
Oh, God, I hate that show. Oh, God damn it.
Someone had to make the joke.
Yeah.
I always make that joke, and it's a very rare thing because I cribbed it from Mystery Science Theater 3000, or at least, or at least, one of their riff tracks or something like that, where they were talking. Somebody made some joke about Thunderdome, and it's can't just get beyond Thunderdome, please. and I always love trotting that out. And the new release of the movie just really has given me grand opportunity for it. So I think that's one of the reasons why I love it so much.
Well, speaking of movies, we got a couple minutes left. Which ones work and which ones don't?
Of the movies?
Yes.
Very quickly.
What's that, Jay?
I can sum it up very quickly.
Go ahead.
Come on!
Works.
You need to know.
Wait, the one with the whales works. 3 works.
Yes. The one with the whales works.
Search for Spock works. Undiscovered Country?
Eh.
Yeah. Jay?
Well.
We're going 3 hours tonight.
No. My girlfriend will kill me if that happens. Let's see. There used to be a long-held... Let's see. It was Simon Pegg, who's come in recently into the headlines about the Star Trek movies. Ironically, we'll round about this. There used to be a long-held line from space, which was, as sure as black is white, as sure as eggs is eggs, as sure as every odd-numbered Star Trek movie is shit.
Except 3.
Well, yeah. But see, this is the thing is that when I was first coming into it, I would sit there as a kid, in between the ages of 10 and 15 and go, oh my God, that is so spot on. EMP was crap. It was so boring. And then you've got the amazingness of Khan and the space fight. And then, we got to go get, Spock, and that's all boring and whatnot. And then you got the funny one with the whales. And then you've got, Shatner's Star Trek V, which was In Search of God, and that was boring. And then you got Star Trek VI, which is, it's a real good murder mystery. And then, as I am now 31, my views have definitely begun to change. And especially it's also in tandem with being able to, take a look at the period of time when those things were released, as well as the mindset that went on behind the scenes, because I'm a voracious, consumer of the behind the scenes stuff, like who said what and why was this decision made, all that type of stuff. And if you look at it, in comparison, if you go to motion picture was, for its time, it was exactly what Star Trek was, just on the grand screen. It took a look at human condition. It really focused on the technology. It focused on emotions. But in all honesty, it was really kind of long and boring. And, when you're looking at that after you've seen, The Next Generation and you've seen Deep Space Nine with all the, the ships, getting into battles and all that type of stuff. And then you go back to TMP and you see the 5-minute flyby of the new Enterprise. And you're like, oh, God, I'm so glad this is on DVD so I can fast forward it.
I had to sit through the theater release.
And during the theater release, was that something that you were just, oh my God, I need this to end?
Oh God, stop it. Yes, we get the point. It's fucking Enterprise. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, for fuck's sake, get out of the goddamn space yard.
Yeah.
But that slow panning shot and that epic music to make you think of Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. And that was part of it, was the fact that they were trying to crib from Kubrick, with the long, drawn-out shots. But the way in which at least Robert Wise put it when he was talking about it was, this was the first time that you were seeing the Enterprise on the big screen. They were getting a real budget to be able to actually do the ship effects, which had been grossly improved from when they were done in the 60s, mainly by Star Wars. And so he kind of felt like that was a love letter to fans saying, hey, here's this amazing thing that you've seen,
but
in
you've
a
never
crap
seen it like
version on your
this.
black and white, but you've never seen it like this, and let me show you this amazing thing. Now, granted, I mean, from a certain standpoint, it's like, okay, that whole thing could have been accomplished in
2 minutes and 20 seconds tops.
Exactly, half the amount of time. But, you're also, taking from the standpoint of Robert Wise felt like he wanted to be artistic, or at least wanted to be heralded similarly to Kubrick.
Okay,
so
the thing is, Kubrick knows his pacing.
Mm-hmm.
Wise did not. And the pacing on that entire movie, even in the original theater release, you could hear half the people just going, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
That's
definitely the mindset that is now, at least, too.
You could hear the shuffling of the seats. You could hear the reaching for popcorn. It was that general feeling of, okay.
Yeah.
We get it.
And it's made even worse now if you actually go back and watch the special extended DVD edition. Oh, God. Like, there's some artistic liberties that were taken there that really annoyed me, and that was that if you start watching the full, special director's edition that they included on that, at the beginning of the movie, they start playing the main theme, which was turned into this 8-minute concerto piece, which was, it started with Ilea's theme, and then it eventually gets into what we know as the main Star Trek theme that was, carried on through TNG and through the rest of the Star Trek movies and stuff like that. But the whole entire DVD release, it starts with 5 minutes of Starfield just playing this music.
Which is great for when you just want to listen to Star Trek, but not when you want to watch the fucking movie.
Exactly, precisely. It made for a really good, soundtrack for you to just kind of chill out to, but in all honesty, if you're having to sit there through that entire thing, it's just got to be mind-numbing. So, anyway, TMP, it had an interesting story, and the story was very much from the sense of what Star Trek was. It was Gene Roddenberry's ideal. That's also one of the reasons why it didn't do all that well, was because of the fact that this was Gene saying, I have all these great plans for the way in which humans conduct themselves, and here's this really kind of boring, flat movie. So then you get into Nick Meyer doing Wrath of Khan, arguably the best Star Trek film that has been released.
The only one I hold higher in this team is Generations, and that's because Kirk dies twice.
Yeah. Well, I won't go that far, but it was definitely, it was well done, and it was an amazing.
The pacing issues were solved.
Oh yeah, and that's because Nick Meyer really was a consummate director and a very prolific author. I mean, what's little known about Nick Meyer is that he is also one of the foremost Arthur Conan Doyle scholars in the world. He's the only guy who actually, as I recall, wrote a Sherlock Holmes story, and it is considered canon because of the fact that it was so close to what Doyle was going for, and that's the 7% solution.
That was actually a good story.
It was very good. And he brought that kind of expertise into Wrath of Khan and was able to identify some of the loose threads that were in TOS, the original series, to be able to bring it to a head and make it a very interesting revenge story.
But you got to give credit where credit is really due. Mikado Montalban.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it did not hurt that they had an amazing actor to be able to portray that character. Anybody lesser than that, probably it wouldn't have been all that interesting.
I'm glad
if it would have been a Klingon, who cares,
Yeah. And they brought the same actor that portrayed the original Khan. And then he's still just... Without Ricardo Montalban, it wouldn't have been as even close to as interesting. Director or not.
Yeah, and then also the very bold move of we're not status quoing this at the end. I mean, that was the very real first time that in Star Trek that the status quo was not preserved at the end of whatever you were watching. With Spock actually dying. And the way in which that they did it, where they didn't gloss over it, they didn't make it campy. It honestly...
It was a very heartfelt and very honest...
Yeah.
Portrayal.
It was, and
it's what you wish as a director you could get a quarter out of any of your stage crew.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, well, look at how the most amazing deaths in film, and that would be definitely something that would be held in very, very high esteem because of the fact that you've got all of these people who genuinely care about that character, and then to kill him off and still make it honorable as well as something that is not immediate and no goodbyes are said or anything like that is it's something that I'm sure that every director and story writer wishes that they would be able to do. But then you get into Star Trek 3, which is actually really, really well done. At least now, sitting here, being a 31-year-old and finally going back and seeing that,
I was one of those rare 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds that thought the third one was just as good as the second one.
Yeah. And in retrospect, yes, it is, and it's very, very well done, and it's got a lot of good stuff, and it actually gets some amazing performances out of certain people, the whole scene where Sarek does the mind meld with Kirk, and they go back and forth, replaying the scene from Star Trek 2. Yeah. I think some of the best acting that I've ever seen is at the beginning of that movie and at the end from William Shatner. At least the best acting out of him I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to have to put that addendum.
Yeah, sorry. Let me qualify that statement. But some of the best acting that I've ever seen out of him was, when they get to the end of that conversation, through the mind meld, and Spock dies for a second time, and he just lets out, this whispered no. It's almost as heart wrenching as when the Doctor's daughter is dying in that episode of Voyager. And then when at the end when David ends up getting killed by the Klingons, that the performance that he got out of that Leonard Nimoy got out of William Shatner for that was really, really well done. And the thing is that I remember there was a story that was going around that had been perpetrated at cons, and actually I remember Leonard Nimoy actually having to come out and shut that down and saying that, the reason why Leonard Nimoy got this really great scene with Kirk, missing his chair and, on the verge of tears and stuff was because Shatner was drunk that day on set and he just happened to catch this amazing real moment. Whereas Leonard Nimoy came out and said, no, Bill and I worked on that for about 6 hours, and that was the best take that we got, and that was some of the best acting that he's ever been able to do, and it was because of the fact that there was a good actor that was up there that was able to, take good
that
action.
Nimoy was able to fucking Kubrick his ass.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
I mean, come on, 6 hours to do one scene. Nimoy, God damn it, Will. Nimoy channeled Kubrick for that. He did.
Oh yeah, and I think it was also because of the fact that he'd known William Shatner for so long that he was able to know exactly what buttons to push to be able to get a good performance out of him. So that probably something that also helped. But to speed along through the rest, I mean, Star Trek 4 is great because it's the first time that Star Trek really did any overt comedy, and it had a very good environmental message. Star Trek 5, I think...
was an unintentional comedy.
It was an unintentional comedy, but I think it was also because of the fact that it was plagued by a number of production difficulties that...
Paramount was going through are we sure we want to continue on this track?
Yeah, and beyond the fact, too, that you had a first-time director in William Shatner, and, he wasn't getting the backing that Nimoy did for Star Trek 3, and he was having to try to do his best with art through adversity. And even at that, I mean, some really great scenes came out of that, too. I mean,
there were some great scenes, but the script itself was just a miss.
The script was just terrible. I think that the biggest flaw was allowing them to, we're going to go in search of God. I think right at that point it should have been, no. Putting a stop to this right now. That is not something that we're going to tackle because of the fact that there's no way that we can do it right and please everybody. And it's too broad of a concept, and it's not going to fly well. And I think that if they would have stopped there and then done something else, that it might not be heralded as so bad as it normally is. But then you get into Star Trek 6, and Star Trek 6
Nimoy took the camera back yet on that one.
Well, no, he doesn't get the camera back. He gets script writing and executive producing back, but Nick Meyer, who did Star Trek 2, he's the one that got to direct that one again.
I always thought Nimoy was more influential than that.
Well, he had, a script final say on it, as well as the fact that he, being the executive producer, a lot of stuff went through him, and so he was in kind of tandem with Nick Meyer and making sure that got produced. But he wasn't directing it this time. Nick Meyer was, and I think that, and honestly, maybe I'm a bit biased because of the fact that was one that came out when I was cognizant of Star Trek, and I was able to, really understand some of the stuff. And so that's why it felt great. I think that there was numerous missteps that happened in that. Like for the first part, the introduction of Valeris, which was supposed to be initially Savick from the earlier films, which would have actually made the whole entire story make sense. And because of the fact that focal point and that fulcrum of the story of Savick being willing to betray the crew that she's known for so long to be able to accomplish this horrendous thing at the end, would have made it an amazing story.
Instead of a really good story.
Yeah, at least it's just a pretty good story right now. But I mean, you still get, this aspect of, this huge world because, not only does, do we see the Klingon homeworld, but we also see, for the first time we see Starfleet headquarters. And then on top of that, we see, Rura Penthe and Khitomer and all these things. And it really all melds together really, really well. And then you get into the TNG movies and, I would say pretty much with the exception of the last two, they were pretty damn good. And the last two, I think, suffered from...
I like Nemesis, but that's me.
Nemesis, I wasn't the biggest fan. I felt like it didn't do a lot of things right. And what ticked me off even more was after I watched the Red Letter Media Plinkett review of Star Trek Nemesis and then realized, oh, wait, it is a complete retread and rehash of Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
That really pissed me off even more. And the main thing is Stuart Goddard, who ended up being the director for the final one. He apparently hated Star Trek. Like on a level of J.J. Abrams,
Yeah.
And that was the main problem that a lot of the cast said was, well, we had a director who didn't really give a shit. He was just doing another movie that was science fiction, and he didn't really care. And I think it really failed mainly because of the fact that there was not the same care that was put into the previous two that had been done by, David McCarthy and Jonathan Frakes. So... yeah, but that's kind of my take on those movies. And as for the other two, well,
they don't exist.
They don't exist, and we were 5 minutes over. So
that's all right. And thank you again, Jay, for swapping your schedule around.
Sure thing.
Thank you, other Jay, for being here as usual.
Anytime.
This has been a wonderful episode of Tit for Tat. J Hash, I'm looking forward to having you on the show again.
Great. I look forward to it.
Yes, I'm doing it.
Next week, we will be having John Kelly on the show. Hopefully, the weather permitting. We had to swap him because he had tornadoes and flooding out there, so keep it safe out there. Hope you guys are okay. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. This has been another episode of Tit for Tat.